So you've heard of Nihon Falcom's Venerable Trails franchise and you're wondering where you should dip your toes into this series. In this video, I'll explore where you should start. I'll look at it from a few angles, so this video might be a bit on the longer side. As a result, chapters will be used. So if you want to skip around the video, you can do so. For the first section, we're going to look at playing the games in chronological order, then we're going to look at them from the perspective of starting at the Crossbell Duology, then we're going to look at it from the perspective of starting with the Erebonian Arc, which is what I did. The final part of the video will be my own opinion on where to start the franchise, so let's get into it. For a lot of people, they can only start with a franchise in release order, and that is totally valid. In most cases, you're able to jump into a video game at any point in the franchise and you won't get confused. You'll just miss a few references. With the Trails series, you can't get into the franchise willy-nilly because of how interconnected the series is. For those reasons, you're probably best served leaping in where the sub-series began, that being Trails in the Sky, which fans love calling by its acronym. Trails in the Sky focuses on the story of young bracers Estelle and Joshua Bright. It has a very slow pace, some would call glacial. I would call it deliberately paced. It's in this game the tropes of this storied franchise become established. This ranges from political intrigue to NPCs whose storylines play out throughout multiple games. For the purposes of this video, I will skip spoilers of the storylines for these games, so if you want to investigate that, there are other videos out there for you. However, other reasons you'll want to experience the games in chronological order comes down to how basic the gameplay is. Trails in the Sky is the most bare bones of bare bones JRPGs. For some people, this will be a selling point, and for others, this will be a no-go. I'm personally okay with it, but it's something to keep in mind. If you want to see the mechanics of the games evolve with the storylines, Trails in the Sky is your best entry point. I have personally played the first two games, but not the third entry because I didn't have access to a PC until recently. If you want to play the Sky Trilogy, PC is your best bet, as the first two games are available on the PSP, but not the third one, at least in English. You could always go through hoops to get a working copy of Sky Third Chapter, but the quality of life improvements are far better on the PC version. The Crossbell Duology consists of Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure. Widely considered two of the best entries in the Trails franchise. While I like Zero, it isn't my favorite game in the franchise. I'm not very deep into Azure yet, but I can understand why people love this game so much. It has a ton of amazing mechanics, and Azure feels like the point in the series where the mechanics caught up with the grandiose storylines Nihon Falcom clearly want to tell. Thankfully, you can hop into the franchise with Zero. However, you will lose out on a ton of story impact for some characters such as Ren Bright. However, beyond that, it's mostly just little references that don't impact the story too much. It's also interesting to see some of the events referenced in the Erebonian Arc from a different perspective, as the Crossbell Duology and the first two Cold Steel games overlap timeline-wise. For the most part, the Crossbell Duology is standalone enough you can start here. Zero is also fairly basic in terms of mechanics, whereas Azure is mechanically rich. While the core gameplay is very similar to the Sky Trilogy, with bracer jobs being replaced by police assignments, they're basically the same thing, as it boils down to investigate information presented by NPCs, find missing items, people or pets, and beat the shit out of optional bosses. It's basic, but it works. The SSS are a lovable group of misfits, and their personal journeys are amazing to witness. If you just can't deal with the archaic design of the Sky Trilogy, this might be the point of entry for you. Just keep in mind you will be missing out on some storylines that prove important not only in this game, but the Cold Steel games as well. Anyways, moving on to the Erebonian Arc. This is where I started the franchise. A lot of Trails stalwarts will say the Cold Steel games simplified things a bit too much and aren't as mechanically rich as the previous two arcs. I don't agree with that assessment. Yes, it's easier to optimize your character builds in the Cold Steel games thanks to the Master Court system, making it significantly easier to min-max your characters. However, the game has a ton more actual mechanics and gives players more options in how to use them. Cold Steel 1 is the most basic entry in this subseries and is as stripped back as Zero. This is fine since it's the entry point into a new subseries and is intended to be forgiving to newcomers. However, Cold Steel 2, 3, and 4 ratchet up the number of mechanics thrown at the player. In Cold Steel 2, you gain access to the overdrive mechanic, which is similar to the burst mechanic found in Azure, only you have much more control over it. During Overdrive, your characters are cured of status ailments and can act for 3 consecutive turns while arts become instantaneous. You can build your Overdrive gauges and keep them in Cold Steel 2. For Azure, you build it up over time and it depletes after a certain number of battles, basically making it a use it or lose it mechanic. In Cold Steel 3 and 4, you gain access to Brave Orders, which allow you to use your battle points accrued for performing well in battle and gain a number of differing effects for a number of turns based off who you have in your party, and some of these can be game-breaking. So much so, Una Crawford's Sledgehammer was significantly nerfed in Cold Steel 4. I can't say how the mechanics play out for Trails into Reverie yet, as I haven't played the game, but from what I've heard, it has the most mechanics for any Trails title released to date. However, let's get into the story side of things. If you're starting out Trails of Cold Steel 1 and 2, they are self-contained enough that you don't have to worry about storylines being spoiled. You'll miss a few references, but that's about it. However, you are going to run into troubles when it comes to the final 3 games in the Erebonian Arc, as Cold Steel 3, 4, and Reverie basically require you to have knowledge of the Sky Trilogy and Crossbell Duology. Part of why you need that knowledge is because Falcom wrap up long-dangling plot threads from the Sky Trilogy and the Crossbell Duology in these games. At minimum, you need to look up a summary of these games to even understand what's going on. In my opinion, it's rather difficult to decide where to start with the Trails franchise. It is my favorite series of all time, don't get me wrong, but it's a massive time investment for people, and it can be daunting. I would personally say research each entry, find the one that speaks to you, and start there. Just make sure you're starting with either Sky First Chapter, Trails from Zero, or Trails of Cold Steel. These are the starting points in their respective arcs, and thus are the most accessible to newcomers. I started with Trails of Cold Steel, and I feel that title is the most accessible all around. The game is challenging, but streamlined enough it won't frustrate newcomers. Unlike the Sky Trilogy, which can be unforgiving in how hard it'll punish unprepared players, which is something Falcom ironed out by the time Trails from Zero rolled around, which can be a difficult game at times on higher difficulties. So, if I had a gun against my head, I'd honestly say start at either Zero or Cold Steel, then work your way backwards if the games interest you. In all honesty, the Sky Trilogy really do need a remake, and I think they're deserving of an HD 2D remake, and Toshihiro Kondo, Falcom's president, has said he wants to remake the Sky games. However, I think more than likely they'll get remade in Falcom's new 3D engine. Either option would be glorious though, but yeah, either play the Crossbell Duology first or the first 2 Cold Steel games and then work your way backwards if you fall in love with the franchise. I feel it is the best bet for most people. So there's my thoughts on where to start the Trails series. If you've played these wonderful games, let me know where you started and where you feel newcomers should start their journey. Want more of my Falcom content? Check out my video on why 2023 is the year of Nihon Falcom, or if that doesn't take your fancy, take a gander at my games deserving of remasters or remakes. Until next time, keep blazing that trail.